The rest of this project is on the other side of this motor. And what we need to do here is, this motor was set up for a under flywheel magneto. And what does that mean? It means that there's no charging system, there's no stator. So let's look at some parts that we have here and we'll talk about this. So this flywheel here is the original flywheel that came off of this machine. This flywheel is one that I just purchased that goes with a regular 15 amp stator. And you say, well, what is the difference, right? And I'll show you the difference. So here's a stator, right? This stator normally would go right in the middle of that magnet, and as the flywheel spins, it goes by the stator and creates the charge. This flywheel, the stator doesn't fit in. And what that means is that the old under flywheel magneto ignition was a smaller diameter than what this stator is. And the old under flywheel system did not have a stator because it didn't need a charging system. It was probably a pull start or something like that, or maybe in all reality it probably had a starter generator on this machine. Now someone's put a regular starter on here, which I can tell is not factory to this motor, but that's what we're working with here. So what I need to do is take off this bearing plate, and once I take that bearing plate off, I have a new bearing plate that the stator will mount on. So if you look at this bearing plate, there's 2 holes in there. The stator has 4 holes. These holes don't match up with those holes, and it's just completely a different design. So I was able to find online some parts here, and I gotta figure out where the heck I put them. Oh, here they are. Let's see, they're right next to me. So we got a really nice stator, and we got a really nice bearing plate. And if you look at the difference on these bearing plates, mainly it's that this area here sticks out farther from the plate to compensate for putting that stator on there. So when this thing got shipped, these holes here got a little mangled because it was all in the same box as the flywheel, and I think it crushed it a little bit. But you can see this stator will mount on there real nice, and the wire goes right out that back hole there, and it will eventually run out the side over here by where the coil is. Now the coil, that's another thing. That's not how the coil should be mounted on this motor, so we'll relocate the coil also. But so I got to take these 4 bolts off. I also got a new seal here, a PTO seal, because I don't want to take this thing apart again, because it's probably going to start leaking oil. And this is pretty rough looking around the crank here, so I may just sand that down a little bit once I pull it off. So I actually have a sealed driver kit that I got from Harbor Freight. What I'm going to do with this one is I'm not changing the bearings or any of that nonsense. I'm just going to take a, well, maybe I will. This bearing doesn't even want to turn. Anyways, let me take off the existing bearing plate, and we'll reassess the situation. So before I take that bearing plate off, I got to drain the oil out of the motor though, because it's full of oil, and obviously you just can't start dissecting a motor while it's full of oil. Oh, this bearing's fine, just needed a little persuasion to get going, but it's fine. So we'll just take a screwdriver and pop that seal right out the front. Okay, so what we're going to do is take this bearing plate off, and it turns out that I pulled the dipstick and there's pretty much no oil in this motor anyway, so I'm not going to screw with the oil here. So these bearing plates are real simple to take off. There's just these 4 bolts. You can take them out. see. Now, give it a little persuasion. There we go. Now, I was afraid this might happen. The bearing seems to be kind of hung up on the crankshaft from getting it off, so we may have to try some finagling here somehow, and it may make this a little harder than I wanted it to be. Let's see if we can get lucky here and just press on it. Now, I don't care if I screw up this bearing plate because I'm never going to use it again. Normally, you would care a little more about it, but I don't in this instance. Yeah, it's pretty much on there. Good. So, well, let me reassess the situation and we'll see what we can do. Well, here's what I did. I screwed this nut on the flywheel so it's kind of flush with the crank. I pulled on the bearing plate with one hand and I just gave it a couple taps with the hammer and it was able to slide right off. So now I just got to pull the key out of the crankshaft and then I should be able to slip this right off. And we're almost done. This is great. So I got the bearing plate off and I have this brand new Sten's seal here, which is going to go right in here. And I don't know if you guys have ever seen this, but this is called a seal driver. I got this at Harbor Freight. There's a whole set. It's like 20 bucks and it really works great for putting these seals in. So can't do this with one hand, but basically line up the seal and tap it with a hammer a couple times and it'll go right in. Now here's the block here. So I got to clean up some of this crap around here without it falling in, but I was able to get that crank right out and it was really no big deal. So I'm going to put some rags over this or something and try to just brush some of this old leaves and stuff off there before I put the bearing plate back on. But really I just got to drive the seal in, clean that off, put it back on with 4 bolts, put my stator on with 4 bolts, put my flywheel on, and I'm ready to roll here. So we'll check back in a bit. Now when you put the bearing plate back in, you got to make sure that you got the wire for the stator coming out the hole first. And what happens is as you tighten up these 4 bolts, it just draws the bearing plate right back in over the crank like it's a little puller just by tightening these things. Now you got to be careful that your wire is not pinched behind the top up here. I've done that mistake before, and you know, it is what it is, but I have made that mistake. In fact, I'm making it right now. So we loosen this up and we're going to pull this up all the way. In fact, what we're actually going to do is take a piece of black wire and run it behind here for the points, because whoever had this thing going before doesn't have the points wire in the right spot. So I happen to have a whole roll of black wire sitting right here. So before I tighten this up, I'm going to cut off the end of this because it's a little crappy, but before I finish this project, let's run this wire right through the back here. And that way we can make a new wire for our points. We'll have it go in the correct spot like it should. I got plenty of extra wire hanging out the other side. Again, you got to hold this wire all the way up on the top when you tighten this, because you don't want it to get pinched between the block and the bearing plate, because then it's going to break your wire. And then you're going to end up with a situation where it shorts out to ground. And obviously that situation, you're not going to have any spark, you're not going to have any charging system, and you're going to be one unhappy guy. So let's get this going here. Check my wires. They're still moving, that's good, they're not pinched. Now these bolts don't need to be really tight. So we'll just snug them up. Just probably a foot-pound spec that you can use. I don't mind doing that. I should do that probably. Get my Kohler book out and I'll see what the real torque is supposed to be. Now, the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to run a bead of black silicone around this PTO seal here. And that way I can ensure that it's not going to leak oil out here. You guys have probably seen motors where there's an oil leak here. And what happens is the oil comes out, comes down, hits the flywheel, shoots everywhere. You end up with a motor that's covered with grease, and it's nasty. So, like somewhere I got to find. I have a tube of black Permatex, and I'll just glob in a little bit around there. And in fact, I'm probably going to call it quits for tonight and put that silicone in, and I'll let it dry overnight. It's pretty cold, so it's going to take a while for it to dry. And I'll probably have to put this back together tomorrow. Alright? Alright guys, so I put my black Permatex in there. And what I'm actually going to do now is hook up the stator. And I happen to have the screw from the old bearing plate, so I'll recycle this. And this will be our first step. Will be to screw in the wire on the top here. Actually, I can do that after, but this takes 1024 screws. So I bought a little pack of those, and also some washers. They're 1-inch long screws. So basically all we're going to do is screw this bad boy down with 4 screws. Really not a big deal. And then our stator will be installed. Should be real simple. Screw these in. Now the beauty about these Kohlers is that pretty much you can swap whatever you want between any of these different spec numbers. And they all have the same crank, cam, valves. Some of the 16 horses have a big valve for exhaust and a little valve, but bearing plates, shrouds, all this stuff is interchangeable. This particular stator happens to be the most popular one that Kohler had, so it's on 90% of the motors. And of course, Gravely being Gravely, had the stupid under flywheel magneto, which, you know, this engine is probably pretty old. It's probably like a 68, and back then, again, they had a lot of starter generators. And why did they use those? I don't know, but you look at Cub Cadets, wheel horses, they had them. Cub Cadets had them long after it became prevalent for a regular starter in this system. Maybe they got them cheap. Maybe there was a lot of them built. Maybe they didn't know if this was going to be a good alternator, and they knew that the other system worked on cars and everything else for so long. So I don't know why they used that, but they did. And then I want to say, like, by 69, they had switched over to this system here. So basically, if you do your homework a little bit, you can find these parts pretty cheap on eBay. This here happened to be out of a case tractor, but again, if you look at the old Kohler parts book, if you have access to that, it's a PDF file. I originally downloaded mine directly from the Kohler website. Of course, the screw is a different thread. But that told me what engines use this, what spec numbers, etc. And you can look, and there's only like 3 different types of alternators, so you've got a pretty good chance of getting the right one. But that's about it. Well, I decided to just clean this hole up real quick with a tap. It is a 1024, just like all the other screws that held the stator on. So I'll just clean up these threads real quick. Seem to be buggered up. That's the problem with these bearing plates, is that they are aluminum and it's not the toughest metal in the world, and these stupid threads get buggered up pretty easy, especially on the bolts that hold the shroud on, the 1/4-20s. There you go, that's better. Tighten this up. There you go, perfect. And you know, I'm checking all my wires. They're still all good. And this is good. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my nut off the flywheel here. And I'm going to get my new flywheel that's made for this stator. And I'm going to hook that up. Let's get this out of the way. Now, let's see here. This is very simple. Just got to line up the keyway to the key. And put it on. And we should be in good shape. Now, I don't want to turn over the motor because I want that silicone to dry before I do anything. Are you kidding me? Seem to have an issue here. It doesn't want to go on. Maybe the key's just buggered up a little bit. I'm going to clean up that key a little bit. There's just some burrs on that key and it should go right on. The key is too screwed up. I'm just going to make a new key. I have some key stock. It just doesn't happen to be here. It happens to be in a different location. So I'm going to just call it quits for now. But basically I just got to make a new key. This old one is all crappy, so might as well just make a nice smooth new one. The flywheel fits fine without the key in there, so I'm not really worried about it, but I'm just going to make a nice fresh key. Maybe we'll do that tomorrow. Slip it in, put this bolt on, and then I basically at this point just got to put the blower housing back on, and I'm going to make some connections here on my wires for the coil. I'm going to do the same thing on the point side there, and I do need to probably investigate this carburetor. I think it would be at least prudent to take it off and clean out the bowl at a bare minimum, as long as I have the motor out of the machine and everything. I might as well just do this all up front. But anyways, that's how you change a K241 from a magneto ignition to a coil ignition. Alright guys, till next time, hopefully the next video will be me mounting this 10 horse on the Gravely 450 and getting it running. See you guys.